All right.
Thank you for joining. We're going to start in just a few minutes. While we're getting going, maybe you could just type in the chat box, where are you joining us from this evening? And why did you register for tonight's event? What are you hoping to take away? For those who just joined, we are going to start in a couple of minutes. Thank you for joining this evening. And perhaps you could just put in the chat box where you are calling in from tonight, and what do you hope to take away from tonight's session?
Can you confirm that they can hear us? Okay, we're starting to get some. All right, Farron in Orlando as a nonprofit. Awesome.
Good.
Some tips. And we got Bethlen from Tampa. Great.
Just a reminder that there are two options in the chat box. In the to line, it lets you send to just the hosts, or you can send to everyone. It's probably better if you send it to everyone when you have the chance. Melbourne, Georgia. Okay.
Kimberly, that sounds fascinating. Okay, great, Paul. Hope we can help out with that. Thanks for joining. Anybody else? Share where you're from. North Carolina. All right. And I want to start a nonprofit in DeLand. Okay.
Well, you're in the right place. Good.
Yep. Jacksonville, amateur radio emergency services. Excellent. In Jacksonville. Okay.
We'll just give it a few more seconds here. We're at 7 o'clock.
Okay. And Barry, do you have intro slides on SCORE?
Yes, I'll pop those up if you don't mind.
Yeah. Yep. You can take over, put yours on.
All right.
Thank you.
Good. I hope everyone can see the charts. So just a reminder, tonight's session is building and running a successful not-for-profit. And our presenter, who you see on the screen, is Dave Harrison. My name is Barry Black. I'm with the Mid-Florida chapter of SCORE, and I organize our various workshops. I just want to take a minute to introduce SCORE itself. We are a national nonprofit organization. Our objective is to help people who are looking to start or grow a small business. We do that primarily through mentoring, kind of one-on-one mentoring, either in person or over a phone call or a video call. And complementing that, we put on a wide variety of business workshops. Most of them are online, like tonight's event, but there's virtually one every night on some business topic. And through our website, you can get access to a variety of tools or templates that might help you in your business. SCORE is a resource partner of the U.S. Small Business Administration. They fund our operation. And we have over 10,000 volunteers across the country, all people who have lots of business experience and want to share that experience with you so that you don't have to make the same mistakes that we've already made. Within the past few months, SCORE updated its website. And whether you go to the national website at score.org, or you go to the Mid-Florida website as shown here, or any of our sister workshops across the country, they all have the same look and feel. Basically, that little plus sign in the middle left there If you click that, you can enter your zip code and it'll come back and show you which SCORE chapters are closest to you, so you can benefit from proximity to mentors and so on. The little buttons to the right, first one is local mentors. So again, that's where you would request free confidential mentoring. Just click that and you'd have to put your contact information in, and we'll get back to you and try to set up sessions at a time that's convenient for you. The middle one, local workshops, of course, is where we show a wide list, a long list of upcoming events and where you can register for them in advance. Local resource, that button takes you to the templates and blogs and a lot of recorded webinars on all sorts of topics. So we hope you find SCORE and our website a useful resource, and perhaps you'll share that with colleagues that you're familiar with. Now, tonight, our presenter is Dave Harrison, on the call, of course. Dave is a SCORE mentor. He also teaches MBA students full-time in all sorts of business subjects. He's had a long career as a senior executive at major companies like Johnson & Johnson, Standard Industries. And he's also started several entrepreneur ventures of his own, and has a lot of experience in not-for-profits, tonight's topic. With that, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and turn everything over to Dave.
Excellent. Thank you, Barry. And let me just make sure that they can see my screen. And can you just confirm you can see my screen?
I can, yes.
Okay. And let me just make sure I've got the chat box up so I can see that. Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, let's try to define success today, because really this is all about you. And I want to make sure that, we're meeting your needs is going to be helpful to you. So you tell me if this would be success for you. One, you understand a little bit more insight. Why bother with a nonprofit? When a nonprofit might be a better choice than a for-profit. Steps to legally structure it and register a nonprofit. Thoughts about recruiting a board. Going to help you achieve your dreams. Talk also about the pitfalls. Avoid the common ones. A little bit about the numbers. You can't ignore the accounting. You can't ignore the finance. I'm going to talk about the revenue side, because there can be a revenue side of this, and your leadership, making it happen. If we can accomplish these 8 things in this short period of time, share back with me in the chat room. Would you agree that that would be a successful night for you? Right? Just want to make sure. And if there's anything else that you're saying, boy, I wish he was also covering this. Is there anything else that you think I'm missing here? If you do, type in the chat room. If not, I'm going to keep going. All right. Looks like it's good. Looks like everyone's on board. And let's get going. All right. So first thing is, why would you start a nonprofit? And for a lot of us who have and done, it's sort of simple. It's an opportunity. You feel like changing the world. As Mahatma Gandhi said, best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others. Make the world a little bit better place because you were there. And not everybody is excited about that. That doesn't fit everybody. It's not a value judgment. But for those of us and those I know who have had success with nonprofits, they just want to do something so that their period on life makes a difference. In fact, if some of you more my age remember, there was a great runner, Kip Keino. He was one of the greatest African runners that ever lived. You might know him because he's most of these marathons seem to be won by either Ethiopians or Kenyans, and frankly, of the top 250 marathoners in the world, 200 train in his home. And I remember sitting there in his home in Africa some years ago, population 3 million in the city, and only 5% had running water and electricity. And I remember he turned to me and said, and there's a guy, remember, in Africa, one of the wealthier people in Africa, certainly, someone who has made the entire continent very proud, multiple gold medals. And he looked at me and says, you know, Dave, you come into this world with nothing and you leave this world with nothing. So your only real value is how you leave your family and your friends and your community behind. And I'll share a little bit more later in the session on some things I was able to do with Kip, which was quite rewarding. But big picture, you know, when you're considering a nonprofit, because there is a choice, some people choose a nonprofit setup, some choose a for-profit setup. Let's just quickly compare the difference. In a for-profit organization, why does it exist? To make a profit. And who gets to keep the profit? The owners. And the revenue, well, that's from sales. And the assets that you accumulate, you can sell them, right? A not-for-profit organization really exists to serve society, make the world a little bit better off because you were there. There is technically no owner of a nonprofit. Any excess from growth or, you know, so-called profitability, excess cash or whatever assets, it's distributed to the causes that it represents. And the revenues, there's multiple sources of revenues. It can be from grants, it can be from sales, it can be from donations. So there's a lot more variety of what a nonprofit can do, right? And sometimes, I mean, there have been cases where even in my consulting and advising within SCORE, I've had clients that had intended initially to have a for-profit organization and realized based on what they were doing, a nonprofit was a better fit for them, both personally, from an income standpoint and purpose, what they were trying to achieve. So there's some nuances here that, you know, you want to watch, right? So when is it worth considering nonprofit? For the most part, nonprofits it comes from a 501c filing. And what are some of the advantages? Why would you consider doing a 501c3? One is personal liability, right? So what that organization does, it protects you as an individual, basically, unless it's total negligence, and it's its own entity. It's the entity that signs contracts and has the assets or whatever. Two, and this is a huge one, it's tax exempt. Now, what does that mean to you? Well, it means that you can raise funds from donations, and those donations that are made to the organization are tax deductible for the person who provided it. And in Florida, you can even obtain a sales tax exemption. So again, depending on what you're trying to do, sometimes the ability to take in donations and drive an organization without paying a sales tax, for certain types of entities, that's a really great fit. Terms and discounts. Sometimes suppliers and landlords will provide a discount to a nonprofit, you know, and frankly, statistically, the cost of labor tends to be about 25% lower. Another big one is grants. In certain industries, having grants in certain so-called business, having grants is huge from government and foundations. And again, raising money from those sources to drive the outcomes that you're looking for. And, you know, there are some big nonprofits that frankly generate some pretty nice personal salaries and income. A great example of that is Goodwill. I mean, there are Goodwill stores that the employees, sometimes managers of a Goodwill store can sometimes make even a lot more money than a manager of a Walmart store. And legacy, and that's often a big one. You earn that place in history, that it's essentially social entrepreneurship. So what's some disadvantages? One, you have less control over decisions. There are, as you'd imagine, because of the tax benefits, there are some tighter rules and regulations of what you can do. Two, it's not really a personal asset, so it doesn't create personal wealth itself. It can create good income as salary, and again, there's restrictions on compliance. So the question really is to be or not to be, right? If, you know, the obstacles for revenue are low for a nonprofit, for a for-profit, and the profit potential is low for a nonprofit. Which is going to be best for you? It depends what you're looking to achieve. So what are the steps? Steps are not as complicated as you might think. And I created a checklist for you, right? Basically, you've got a few government filings, all right? You got to register with the state. And when you register with the state, what are you sharing? The name of your nonprofit and the purpose of the nonprofit, right? 2, you got to register with the state, especially in Florida, your sales tax exemption. That tends to be true of most all states. And 3, it's a separate registration if you want to solicit donations. And that can be a big part of why set up as a 501c3 versus other types. You're then going to register federally with what's called the EIN number. And the EIN number just says we are an entity and we've got a tax filing. And the tax filing, it's not that we're paying taxes, it's the tax exempt portion, but there are things that you've got to report, showing, what you spent money on, where money came in, where your expenses went to, whatever. And you got to register federally the 501c3 not-for-profit status, which then ties to your EIN. All right, and that's how that part works. Then on an ongoing basis, you got to do some documentation, and I'm going to share what those are. But one is called the Articles of Incorporation, right? That's what it's all about. 2 is the bylaws. Those are the guidelines that are being agreed to that you've got to follow. And 3 is meeting minutes. And that's something that you don't necessarily have to do in a for-profit world in the same way, although board of directors do. But in general, meeting minutes of every significant meeting, that's required under a nonprofit. Couple of rules of thumb. If you decide to do a 501c3 and you think it's a good fit for you, generally you can get all the approvals that you need in about 3 months. And if you use one of the support organizations, rule of thumb is you want to budget about $1,200 to get it all set up, both within the state and federally. Or if you want to figure it out and do it all yourself, rule of thumb is about $600. Any questions so far, by the way? And there's a question, is there a deck for this class? We will be sending one out. Barry, we're going to be sending out the PowerPoint as well as a recording of this, so that will be available. And that should be, I think, yeah, Barry just noted that in. It'll be available tomorrow, so that's fantastic. Thanks, Barry. Any other questions so far before I keep going? All right, is this helpful so far? So, a few places to get support. All right. I looked at all 3 of these, and that's where I got the rule of thumb is the $1,200. LegalZoom is a very good one. That happened to be the one I happen to use, right? And I have addendum that shares the questions they're going to ask. But Zen Business is also good. Rocket Lure is all good. And using them to help guide you through, the reality is it's probably an extra about $600. For me personally, I had the comfort of knowing it was less likely that I was going to miss something. And let me just see a couple of questions here. The sales tax. So the issue in the sales tax is, let's say you're selling items to raise money. Let's say that you've got a group of people, I'm making it up, and they're making quilts. And they're making quilts to sell to the public, and the money is a fundraiser. Okay, in that case, you wouldn't need to charge sales tax. You'd have the sales tax exemption. But Carol, did that answer that question for you? Just want to make sure. And I think it's Kathia says, what if you have a for-profit and you want to transition it to a nonprofit? Can you do that? You can. It's generally easier to set up the nonprofit and then have a transfer of the assets, sort of sell the assets from one to another and start that scratch that's something you might want to talk to a specialist about. I have seen it done. I did it once myself. I don't know if the way I did it was, I don't know if frankly, if there was a better way. Mine was simple at the time. It was a small for-profit. I just sold the assets so-called to the, or donated, frankly, the assets to the nonprofit and restructures a nonprofit and re-registers a nonprofit. So Kathy, I hope that can help you. I'm going to talk about the board. I'm going to talk about the family members on the board, a nonprofit. The answer is yes, but I will get to that. And someone asked if I want a gift store on a nonprofit website and a sales tax for printed materials. I'm not sure what you mean there. I think the question, if the question is, can I have a website and have gifts on there, and all the revenues is going to the nonprofit, yes, I believe you can set that up. You're getting into something else there, though, that I'm not familiar with, which is by state, how the state regulations go across all states from a website. So I'm not sure of that. I think LegalZoom or Zen Business or Rocket Lawyer would be able to help you with that. All right. So let's talk about the different parts of it. All right. So again, it's not complicated, and a lot of it is, it's not that scary once you realize what's involved, right? So the articles of incorporation, that's the state filing, right? Here are the things they're going to ask. What's the name? What address is it located? Often that's a personal address where you're starting it. What's its purpose? The agent is generally you or someone else that's part of the board. That's who the communication is going to come from. Who's the key team, at least initially when you start it. You can update that later. A financial summary, what are you starting with, and how's it being, what's the financial plan? And then if there are employees, a lot of new nonprofits don't have employees, but if there are employees, what's the plan for employees? All right, and that's the state filing. So what's in the bylaws? And that gets to some of the questions I saw asked earlier. I'll talk about. One is the governing structure, all right? So one key thing there is, in some governing structure, the decisions are made by the board. And in other guiding structures, it's the members, it's the voting that drives the major decision. So that's one thing you've got to put. Which way is it going to be? Second is the roles of officers and directors. And someone asked, well, are there laws about officers and directors? No, you can, depending on what the entity is, there may be some guidance, but basically there's nothing about, family or friends, whatever, as long as it's all kept at arm's length. And what it's going to describe is what are their responsibilities and what's the length of term, right? And, is it a lot of board of directors? Some they can serve as long as they want. I've seen, so for example, the Gates Foundation, they don't have a team length for key members. There are other organizations I've seen and been on that it requires a turnover of board members, say every 3 years. I believe Rotary, for example, has that kind of clause in a lot of their chapters. I believe that's true. That might be local chapters. The third key thing is, what are the voting rules? All right. So for example, how many have to be present for a vote to count as a decision? A fourth area is, how do committees get formed? What's the process for approving a new committee? And what's the process for appointing people to that committee? Right? And the next is conflicts of interest. What would be examples of conflicts of interest? And the last is amendments. And usually the amendments are more detailed processes. All right. And I see a question from Sean. Can you have something structured in your bylaws and others voted on? Yes, you can have a hybrid of how those works, as long as it's spelled out, as long as it's clear, and as long as it's all done for the purpose of what the nonprofit is set up for. And again, what the government's really looking for is, look, I'm giving you some advantages tax-wise and ability to raise funds. In exchange for that, I want to make sure you're not using it for primarily for personal, or that it's not creating conflict. And basically, that's what they're looking for. And that basically, that's what the combination of the bylaws and the articles of incorporation designed to do. The meeting minutes is the process. And so one big difference between a for-profit and nonprofit is just the requirement of meeting minutes. And there are certain key things it has to include. Who attended? What was the agenda? What was the objectives of the agenda? What got discussed? What, if any, decisions got made? What action steps came out of those decisions and assignments? And ideally, when the next meeting will be, or how and when it'll be announced that the next meeting would be. All right. Again, if you look at those, they're not that complicated. It's not that scary. It's more of just having a checklist to make sure you follow some pretty simple guidelines. And when you look at why the guidelines are in place, they make a lot of sense. So the question became the board, and the volunteers and staff. And I tried to put together a cheat sheet for you to try to make all that complexity, frankly, it's pretty simple. So step one, you want to step back and ask yourself, the board members, for the volunteers, for the staff, what's in it for them? I mean, you may have the greatest idea in the world on how to make the world a better place because this organization is going in place. But different people put in their energy and join for different reasons, right? So, for example, what's in it for them? For some people, it may be, part of the creation, having a personal legacy in life. Some it's because of the purpose of the organization, and that gives them some fulfillment. There are people who join nonprofits and boards for the network. Again, I'll use examples like Rotary Club. I know a lot of my friends that are in Rotary Club and in higher, well, not even necessarily in officer positions. It's because it exposes them to a network of people, both for professional purposes, but it could even be just for relationship and social purposes. And again, social purpose specifically, friendships often get reinforced in the reason that people want to get involved. And enrichment, will there be learning that takes place for them? So you want to look at and say, for each board and volunteers and staff, create the story up front. What's in it for them? Why would they want to participate in their energy? And step two is you want to step back and say, what do we need from them, right? One, do they have passion for the concept? If they don't have passion for the concept, is that a good fit? Two, will they have the time needed for the position you're asking them to fill? Three, do they have the skills you need? And frankly, do you have the mix of skills? So for example, having a board or having volunteers that, for example, are all geniuses at, say, finance and banking. I mean, it's nice to have some of that talent on your board, but you need a lot of other talents on the board. So do you have a full mix of people that you need? Four is, what networks do the different people have to access different kinds of resources? Certain nonprofits need to reach multiple constituencies, and as your board member makeup, have those contacts it's going to need. And funding and donations. I've seen some boards, frankly, nonprofit, that a lot of the members were specifically chosen because of their financial ability to personally contribute, right? So one place I see that a lot, universities. Oftentimes the people put on the boards of universities, frankly, it's a way to get to those people that they feel absolutely committed. And I've personally been on some boards that even in the recruiting, they share with you, look, we expect board members to set the tone for everybody else. I remember one board I was on that said, hey, if you don't feel passionate enough about this to contribute in that case, it was a minimum of $10,000, which is a lot, at least to me it was. I don't know about to all of you. Then it'll be difficult for you to ask other people to contribute a significant amount of money, right? So, person asks, can a board member also hold a staff position? Yes, if it's in the bylaws and as long as it's articulated, yeah, there are often, especially at the higher level of the staff positions, yes, you can do it if it's specified that that's what you're doing. And again, as Michael said, even if they don't have the funds to donate a great deal, maybe they have friends that will. All right. Third thing, once you've done that, now you want to set up, I call it the first date. And what I mean by that is, you know, at the first date, when you first talk to them, in other words, I have an idea of what's in it for them, and I've thought through what I need from them. Now I got to go talk to them and see if they're interested. And I look at it like dating that's going to result in getting married or not to this board. So it's discussing the concept and getting their thoughts about it. And sometimes modifying the vision of what's in it for them and what's needed, modify that based on their thoughts, finding out their interests, because based on their interests, they may have other ideas or other places, you know, so-called, as we talk about in business, are in the right seat on the bus. So consider their thoughts and put together action steps that are mutually beneficial. And step 4 is, well, let's get going. And let's get going, usually for an effective board, starts with a team bonding situation where they get to know each other and feel good about each other and learn how to look out for each other. 2 is make sure everybody comes together as a common vision. You know, what's the vision? What's in common? What are they all committing to? 3 is discussing the needs that they're going to have and form committees to accomplish that. 4 is what I call smart objectives. Now, what do I mean by smart objectives? Most nonprofits I've seen, frankly, most for-profit companies that I've consulted for too, they think they've got goals and they think they've got objectives. And I look at them and I say, no, those aren't goals and objectives. Those are dreams. Those are wishes. What's the difference between a wish and a true objective? Well, true objective, it's very clear whether I achieved it or not. Very clear whether I achieved it or not. So what is required of a true objective? It's specific. Here's what we plan to achieve. It's measurable. It's, I know quantitatively what is, I achieved it, I exceeded it, or I missed it. 3, it's attainable, which means it's realistic. It can be achieved. It's not set so that we're doomed for failure, or it's so obvious we're going to achieve it. It's totally sandbagged in same business. The R is it's relevant. And what they mean by relevant is the objective is important to the overall mission vision that we're trying to achieve. And one of the most important ones that's often missing is time. When will it be achieved by? Because if it doesn't have time, well, by definition, you never miss the goal. It's just further out. The last key step of that first meeting get going is what's the schedule? And the schedule sort of ties to the SMART objectives. I mean, those are specific outcomes, but this schedule is not only that, but it's the process. When and how are we getting together to move this forward? And I see a question there from Karen. Should you write the criteria for releasing a board member into your bylaws? Absolutely. In fact, not doing that would almost be negligent. Absolutely write in not only the criteria to be on the board, but more importantly, the criteria to be able to stay on the board in behavior or an action that would cause removal from the board. And yes, that's a very important thing to Karen to build in. Let me know if that answered your question there. All right. So let's talk about, well, how do you get them? Right? Because here's the reality. No different than any other part of your life and world, whether it's for-profit, personal life, whatever. At the end of the day, Zig Ziglar, for the most part, had it right. You're going to get all you want in life. If you help enough people get what they want in life. And frankly, that's not how most of us are wired. But it is a requirement for those who have, in general, extraordinary results. The difference between people with extraordinary results is they are so focused on how can I help somebody else achieve what they want and avoid what they don't want. I'll give you a small example in my life, which will just demonstrate how important I think this is. Some of you may think this was harassment of my children, but from age 6 on, the entire time they lived at home, the first conversation at the dinner table every single night was, who did you see today that looked like they might have a bad day, and what did you do about it? And my kids were expected every day to come home with at least one example of who they saw that day that looked like they might have a bad day, and what did they do about it? And why did I do that? Because I wanted to get them involved early in life where they were focused on trying to look through the eyes of other people with the belief that in this world, if you're a giver versus a taker, generally works out well for you. People want people like that around. And that's what this is all about. Focus on them. What's in it for them? How can you help them? Next, you're going to have a solid plan. And what's the biggest mistake that you see a lot in nonprofits? A ton of passion, and there's no meat. Think about it. Would you put your life savings into building new construction of a new house that the builder didn't have a blueprint? Would you, if you're having important guests over for dinner, for a celebration, would you just try making something without a recipe? Would you take a road trip with the family on vacation without at least a map and ideally a GPS unit to recalibrate? And if you wouldn't do that, why would you take your nonprofit organization and view it as any different? Having a solid plan. How does the whole thing go together? And by the way, that's one of the areas, as Barry will also share, that SCORE can be a real big help. I mean, when I look at the mentors of SCORE and what SCORE is all about, a major piece, a major part, a major tool in the mentoring is helping people through being a devil's advocate and a coach, write a good business plan. So let's get going. We got a plan, right? And we talked about it. The board, we've done bonding. We got a common vision. We got the expectations of each other. What are the needs of the committees? What are the specific objectives that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based? And what's our schedule? With the volunteers, it's a similar thing. What are the committees and how do we get them bonded to each other? What's the vision for that committee? What do they have in common? What are the expectations of each other? What are the needs of this team? What are the specific objectives? What are the accomplishments we're trying to do, and time-based, and who's responsible? And what's the schedule? And frankly, if it's a type of nonprofit that's got a staff, it's that plus more. Yeah, it's the team bonding, it's the visions, expectations, and what are the needs that they're going to use the various committees for, and what are the objectives overall that they're trying to keep track of the schedule. But it's also the staff's specific responsibilities, and document it. It's the decisions, how decisions will be made, and the protocols for making them. It's the processes. What are the requirements on how to get things done? It's an accountability system that's got measures to make sure things are being done right and resources aren't squandered. It's prioritizing. It's making sure the resources are going to the right place. One thing that happens in a nonprofit a lot, I break what a nonprofit does for me, I break into 4 buckets. There's the gold that's really important. The most important thing is to accomplish what we want. But I find in a lot of nonprofits, well-meaning, what I call vampires. What are vampires? It's the stuff that people bring in that to say, but we could do this, and we ought to do this, and how about if we do this? And a vampire sucks the blood out of the most important things. And it loses that important prioritization, right? So one of the things I really watch for a lot in nonprofits, and I watch a lot, is how to keep the vampires, identify them as vampires, and push them aside. It's not that they're not good ideas. It's that it's taking the efforts and energies away from the most important things. The third type I call brick walls. And brick walls, people come in from all different angles on a nonprofit, and they have biases. And sometimes their bias, frankly, is wrong. I call them brick walls. And I learned in business, I learned in personal life, and I learned it even a lot more with nonprofits because it shows up a lot more in nonprofits. A brick wall, when someone else believes it, telling them they're wrong with all the logic in the world doesn't usually work real well. How are you going to steer around that? And the last key type are the ghosts. And the ghosts are the assumptions we need to make. So in my world, I got gold, what's really important, we keep focused on vampires, which I want to identify as vampires and make sure they don't pull the energy away, pull the priority away from what's most important. The brick walls, I want to know what they are. Someone else believes it, I'm going to steer around it. And what are the key assumptions we need to make the gold make sense? And that's prioritizing. At the end of the day, what holds all this up? Communications. Communications is the plan and getting people going. So I'm going to share an example of a couple of that I was involved in. And I shared with you, I was involved with Kip Kino. So I'm going to go back to that story. The story was a family, the Siegel family. He happened to be the second largest distributor in the United States of roofing and siding and windows, whatever, and sold his company, right? And he wanted to make the world a better place because he was there. And one of the things he identified was in Africa, you got a lot of, you got people involved in orphanages, and that's an issue there. You've got education issues there. Frankly, you got economic issues there. And he wanted to make a difference. So he looked at it. What's the situation analysis throughout Africa? Well, orphanages, as Barry shared, they were generally started up by a church, very well-meaning, and then 4 or 5 years into it, maybe they needed a new roof, or maybe they needed a new organ, or maybe they needed a new addition, and the funds went away. And as Barry shared, when that happens, the orphanage isn't really connected to the community, and when the funds go away, it's just horrible. And by the way, orphanages over there aren't so great anyway. Second example was education. And the quality of education in a lot of parts of Africa, most parts of Africa, we take for granted what we have here. In fact, I remember before I went over my first time to Kenya, the Kenyans were very proud, bragging to me that, Kenya was one of the only countries in Africa that an education for, what we call first grade to 8th grade was free. And I'm thinking, this is awesome. And I went over there and I'm walking around with Barry and I see what they call schools. A lot of them didn't have chairs, desks, or anything. If they had a blackboard, they were lucky. If they had books, they were lucky. I mean, it's nothing like what we're used to, broken windows and everything. But I also noticed a lot of kids outside, not in the school. And I remember turning to Barry and go, Barry, I thought I was told that Kenya was way ahead of most of the other countries because school is available. And he said, yeah, Dave, there's one catch though. In order to come to school, the parents have to be able to afford to give their kid a pencil. And that keeps about 25% of the kids out of school. Boy, was that a wake-up call to me of how lucky the things we take advantage of in the United States. All right. And then economics. Not a lot of skills, not a lot of mentoring. That was a situation analysis. So Barry, being the business person he was, and my work with Barry on the board, I was the only one from his business world he brought over to the nonprofit world. I won't go into that story, but step one, what did we do? We bought land and we bought 100 acres. And we always partnered with a famous athlete. And why would we do that? Well, one thing that was surprising to me traveling in Africa is, we might consider ourselves Americans, and secondarily what state we live in or what college for some of us who went to, we have those associations that starts with we're Americans. In Kenya and the other countries, though, that some of them don't even associate themselves as being part of a country. They associate themselves with a tribe. And so one of the reasons we always partnered with what we're doing with a famous athlete, it was an athlete that was either a runner or in that area of sports or what we call soccer, because those are the only two things that cross culture between the tribes. We'd buy 100 acres. Then what do we do? Well, we studied and noticed the English, who have a lot of experience in Africa, they mostly grew tea. We go, why would they grow tea? We noticed, well, most Africans don't drink tea, but you get 50 crops a year out of tea and you get one or two out of corn. So we switched from all corn, right, to 70% tea and set up a micro business, export it. By the way, in the micro business, we always chose a woman because in general, the women over there were pissed off that the men over there it was a mess. I mean, payoffs and everything. So that's first thing we did. Second thing, we bought 40 cattle. And we get 10 for our own use. And we said, what do the English do? He said, we noticed they aren't using it for milk. They're making cheese. And we said, why cheese? Well, the milk converted to cheese and the cost per labor, whatever, and export. And Africans don't eat a lot of cheese, but we already had a micro business set up with women. So now we added cheese. And now we've got cash flow coming in for both the cheese and the tea. Got a revenue stream. Next, we started the construction, right? We built an orphanage for about 100 children. A third were in preschool, before school. A third were in grade school, and a third were in high school. And then we built a grade school of 150 students. Why? Well, out of our 150, about 35 are from our orphanage, and the remainder were from the community because we had the best schools. So the doctors, the lawyers, the politicians in these communities in Africa wanted their kids in our school, and they paid. So think about what we now have. Kids that age don't notice who's got money and who doesn't. So now our orphans are being invited to birthday parties, and they're part of the community, unlike most orphanages, right? And that's the first part of construction. And then we'd recruit teachers from like America and England and other great places as first out of school teaching, but what a great opportunity. And we'd implement it, about 35 orphans, about 150 community children, 150 total. And then we go to the next phase. We build a high school, but with dormitories, because at that time, people knew who had money and who didn't, so they had to wear uniforms. And again, it was 35 of our orphans, 115 from the community. And now we've got a self-sustaining, financially, orphanages, micro businesses, quality education, and integrated with the community. That's what I mean about having a business plan. A passion for something, putting it to the team to do it. We put one of us in each country. I was responsible for Kenya, someone else for Uganda, someone else for Ethiopia, how we did it. And we just used the same business model as a nonprofit model over and over. And that would be an example, right? I'll share one more example. I was teaching at a university, some of you may know it, a business school called Indiana University. It's the Kelley School of Business, happens to be the #1 rated undergraduate business school, according to U.S. News and World Report. And I'm teaching there. As you can imagine, that kind of school had a lot of very wealthy students, very smart students, but very wealthy. And I looked at it and I said, okay, I'm going to set up a 501c3. And I want to get these students exposed at an early age at the idea of giving back and helping make the world a better place because they were there. So what did we do? Well, we went to the inner city schools in Indianapolis and we built a program. I had the students build a program on personal finance for the students, A. B, we then worked with Indiana University so that the high school students in these very poor communities who, frankly, most of them it was a one parent household, very poor. We put them together and we taught them personal finance and arranged that in the Indiana University system, they'd get college credit for it. That was 2. And then we set up Saturday morning sessions, right, where we put together an entire program to help them take the ACT or the SAT or whatever they were taking. And I'll give you an example of how something happened as an example every time. So the first sessions on Saturday morning, I say, look, buy some donuts and drinks or whatever on your way in. We're going to meet at 9 o'clock Saturday morning, and we're going to have about 40 students there, so bring enough for everybody. Now, I knew what was going to happen, but they didn't know what was going to happen. So they'd show up, and they bring the donuts and they bring the juice. And about 10 minutes into it, they said, Dave, Professor Dave, all the food's gone. So, yeah, how could it all be gone? I said, well, for you, your entire life, you probably got 3 meals a day. And on the weekends, you probably didn't worry about food. Well, these kids, we feed them breakfast and lunch every day at school. And for 80% of them, we got to send them home with some food for that night. And on the weekend, we got to give them a bag of food. They aren't used to seeing food. And then I'd have in my car 2 times of what the students had bought. Just different. So we had a whole 501c3 built around that. Again, purpose-driven, had a plan, integrated with the constituencies, and it worked. So common pitfalls, right? Common pitfalls of nonprofits. 1, the pessimistic. Oh, we can never pull this off. 2, the way optimistic. This is going to be easy and we're going to affect thousands of people. Key is, how do you make sure you're just being realistic, right? And it's no different than in business. Those of you in business know there's no glory in a missed forecast, but there's no fulfillment if it's a total sandbag forecast. You want to make sure that we put in enough time. Are we waiting for the perfect plan, or are we just getting going? Do we have analysis paralysis, which often happens in these? We have a clear expectation of what we're trying to achieve, and are we operating on pure emotion, but without any data? We have a realistic plan. Have we documented that plan in a way that we can share it, discuss it, and other people are jumping on board? And do we have sufficient resources to get off and have a chance for success? Do we have the details to support that vision with the resources to make it happen and accountability to make sure things get done? And most importantly, do we have the passion and the commitment? Okay, so what are some differences accounting for a nonprofit and a for-profit? Well, documentation. Both have a balance sheet, and basically they're similar. What are investments and who and what do we owe? Both of them have an income statement. One might not be called an income statement, but both have where's revenue coming in, or at least cash coming in, and what is it used for? Costs. It also has specific cash flow. Each week, each month, can we meet our commitments? And both have a dashboard. What are the key performance indicators that we're looking at to making sure we're staying on track? So the documentation, pretty simple. What's different? Government reporting is different. There are compliance issues in government reporting. It's not complicated, but it's a different type. 2, you still have strategies, you still have strategic plans, you still have resource planning, you still have organization, governance, and leadership. Here's my key point here. Leading a nonprofit is not hugely different in skills than leading a for-profit. Are they different? Yeah. Do they count on getting people excited and bought in and passionate about what you're doing? Yeah, but that's needed in business too. The skill sets are pretty similar. The differences are in the raising money, in the writing grants, in getting donations. So not that different. So let's look at the revenues, and you want to be creative. 1, there's services that you can provide that people actually pay for, or someone else will sponsor it. 2, you get grants. Some organizations get a passion for what you plan on doing and how you can add value for them. And I listed a few for you where you can find some. I found some on federal, grants. I found some from the Department of Education, the Department of Health, the Department of Justice, Department of Housing, which is a significant one, including faith-based organizations. So they're great sources for you. I gave you a couple of sources on fundraising, support from the community. And remember, it can be tax deductible, so that can be good. I gave you sources for, software and some ideas. And then you want to look at volunteers, right? Volunteers can be a great way to help avoid out-of-pocket costs. So think about, is this a good area for apprenticeships, college students or high school students? Is this an opportunity for partnerships, a for-profit company, why they might want to be involved with you as a nonprofit company, right? So I'll give you an example, what I'm working on right now is this growth of people renting shared office space, these places where they might have 100 or 200 entrepreneurs in a building, low-cost sharing space. As a for-profit company, well, we're looking at that as SCORE. I'm looking at that with initiative SCORE locally, that if it works, we'll bring it nationally, saying, hey, that's a great audience for us. We can help the people in that facility. We can help them with mentoring. We can help them with coaching. It's a great source for us to make a difference as part of our mission and vision under the SBA. And sponsorships. A lot of times there are organizations that will sponsor your nonprofit. There's a system of management that's used a great deal in small business, right? Over 200,000 companies are now using this system. It's a pretty simple system. It's called an entrepreneurial operating system, right? And whether you're in business or nonprofit, whatever, I suggest you look at this book. It's a real easy book. It's a real easy book to have your board read. It's a real easy book to have the employees read. It's just a way of thinking. It's not magic. There's nothing really new in it. It combines best practices from over the last 30 years that work for profit and nonprofit, right? And it helps with leadership to set direction, communication. It helps with organizational alignment to make sure you're effective and efficient, and there's accountability. It helps with decision-making to make sure it's team-driven, fact-based, and a commitment to action. It helps with your planning to make sure that things are prioritized and focused on process improvement and measuring and then improving. And it's based on making sure you got a great team culture that's purpose-focused and that they have insight and they feel like they belong and they have pride of being part of it. So there's one book I'd recommend that you at least read, and you might use it. I think for a lot of you that set up a nonprofit or already have one going, and frankly, even on the business side, I use this in my consulting for my for-profits, and I've got clients ranging from $1 million to literally $200 billion a year that I've had put in this EOS system, and it's worked real well. Another thing I want to cover you with real quickly is the communication side to help you in what you're doing, because communication is really key. And it's something not all of us have studied. I'm going to teach you a simple system that I use with all my university students. All right. And I've taught over 2,000 MBA students. And what I found is, and why I use this system is when they're asked a question, sometimes it seems like the paragraphs go forever. And when they're sharing something, again, the same thing is they're not being understood. They just go forever. So here's the method, whether it's a question or something you're trying to share, literally use the words like this. First, I want to share with the context. Here's the situation, and then either describe a concern or risk, something you want to avoid, right? Now, 2 is here's the action we took or will take. 3 is here's the result that we expect to get. And 4 is the lesson learned, right? So let me give you an example, right? An example would be a student comes to me and says, well, why are we doing this big final project that we've got to work as a team and not be able to do it ourselves? Start out, that's a good question. Let me give you the context. One is it's an MBA, and an MBA is about leadership, and leadership in context is about leading groups of people. And 2, especially post-COVID, context is that a lot of people work remotely. And that's a challenge, and it's difficult. We're trying to give you experience of that. And 3rd is to have an MBA accredited, we have to have a team project. So the action we took is this. We put together a team project that's very focused, that's designed to make sure you get a broad view of teamwork and applying it to develop an analysis and a recommendation that the team has come forward with excellent written and oral communications. And the result is you'll be a better leader when you graduate. And the other result is the school will be able to maintain its MBA certification. So the lesson we learned is we've got to have a team project that's valuable to you, keeps the school certified, and is going to advance everybody's career. That's an example of using the Carl method. When you state it that way, you tend to be more succinct, more focused, and better understood. And you can use it both explaining things and sharing things. And one little thing I put under context is this thing of what I like to do with organizations is say, okay, let's look at what happened last week and what didn't go according to plan. And anything that didn't go according to plan, there's only 3 reasons it could have happened. 1, someone didn't understand the plan, educate them. 2 is we got to change our policy. Or 3, someone's attitude or capability is not getting it done. We got to talk to them about it. Those are the only 3 things that can break down if anything went wrong. And by building that in, how you have your weekly discussions also helps set the tone for context. And it's about leadership, right? These are utopian capabilities, but I used to keep this on my desk as sort of a reminder, a pulse check on myself. How am I doing? You could have the curiosity of a cat to be a good leader. You could have a diplomacy of a mafia boss because everyone's got different agendas. You have the patience of a self-sacrificing spouse. Listen out. You got to have the enthusiasm of a first grader, the assurance of a GQ millionaire, the humor of a comedian, not take yourself too seriously, the complexity of a chess player, but simple communications of a checker player, the energy, the resilience of a bill collector, and the honesty of a clergy. That's a lot to do, so good luck with it. That's what leadership's all about. So tell me, how do we do? You said it would be successful if you got some insight. Now, why bother with a nonprofit? When a nonprofit might be a better choice, the steps to structure it, thoughts about recruiting, pitfalls to avoid, thoughts about numbers and accounting, sources of revenues or bringing cash in, and some leadership. And by the way, I put behind it specifically, here are the kind of questions and sources that you want to think about and what the investments are and the questions you're going to be asked to do all the filings. So I'll first turn it over to Q&A. Questions, thoughts, any comments? If not questions and comments, was today successful for you? Did you get value out of what we did? One question is about how to pay staff. It's really going about it in a similar way than you would for a for-profit. The key thing is, what's the value? And the difference is, versus a for-profit, a lot of people are going to do it out of their passion. All right. But there's no different in how you approach it. All right. How many people would you suggest on the board? It depends what I'm doing. All right. If I've got a very large project and I need a lot of involvement and a lot of volunteers, I tend to go with a very large board. I've had boards as many as 30 people on it, or I might break it up and have 15 on boards, but then have a bunch of advisory councils. But if I need a lot of volunteers, I want as many as I can possibly fit on the board. If I've got a very focused project, not a lot of money, and at early stages getting things done, I have a smaller board. All right. Registering a 501c3. I'm embarrassed, Paul. I'm not certain I understand what the 103 is, a full one. I've only done 501c3s, but I know they're pretty simple and they're pretty simple to file. And again, in the addendum, I have the list of questions that you're gonna need. Can nonprofits be in creating films to preserve community and culture? Absolutely. In fact, there are a lot of nonprofits that are involved in preserving community and culture. That's a big area. We have a nonprofit, no growth for 29 years. Oh, doesn't there have to be someone there for a consistent time, hours per week? There doesn't have to be. There's no law about that. Generally, though, if you don't have those kind of commitments and they're not documented, things often don't happen. Do we have access to the slides? Yeah, Barry's going to send that out, I believe, tomorrow, and with the audio that went with this. So you will be getting the slides. Bill, glad you got a lot out of it, and especially the mistakes. Thank you for that. You have so many questions. Hey, the other part is, I am a mentor. I am a coach. If you do need a coach, or you already have a coach, but you want an aligned coach, you can certainly request me. I'm in the mid-Florida, but it doesn't matter. I've helped clients in with and through chapters throughout the country with SCORE, so that's available. What's the view on receiving a percentage of funds as a way of someone to get paid? You can do it. It's tricky, but there are organizations do it. As an example, I go back to Goodwill. Goodwill pays sometimes very significant bonuses. I wouldn't base it so much on time. I would base it on what was accomplished, right? And Karen talks about, well, the federal and state filing seem the most challenging part of my job as treasurer. Yeah, and that's why, it looks like a lot of paperwork. It's why me personally, I use those companies like that I shared before, those legal companies, just because it's a simple checklist. But I did share you with a checklist, and it's at the end. It's just, and the checklist is in the presentation. That is a checklist you can use. And I've seen people do it on their own with just the checklist I provided tonight. So I'm glad you found it. Are there advantages state to state? In general, there may be, but I haven't seen any. I've been involved in nonprofits in Massachusetts, Indiana, Ohio, and now Florida. Honestly, I haven't found any significant. What's a small board? A small board would probably be 4 or 5, but it still can be effective. For the orphanage in Kenya, was there a similar process to set up nonprofit in Kenya? We didn't really have to go through much registration in Kenya. We just went in and got things done. We did things unusually, though. Most people work through the government to get things done toward Africa. And we found every time we tried to deal with the government, it was corruption. So we literally, at first I thought it was crazy. We literally, let's say, for example, we're building a dormitory. And let's say that dormitory was 160,000, it was going to be about 10,000 a week. Even though it was difficult, us, the way we did is we'd work with the construction company and say, okay, what do you plan on doing this week and how much you need? Let's say it was ballpark 10,000. We'd send them a check only for 10,000. And on Sunday night, they had to send us back pictures of what they had accomplished and then ask for and tell us what they needed for the next week. So we were constantly reviewing, cutting checks. But in that case, that was the only way we could keep the fraud and the payoffs and all those things out. So again, thank you, everybody. We'll get this stuff out to you. Again, we can mentor nonprofit organizations. We're not just for profit. And I really appreciate all you joining us tonight. So it sounds like it was a success for you, and you certainly made it enjoyable for Barry and I, and let us know anything we can do to help. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank you, Dave. If you send me the slides, I'll make sure they get distributed.
I will do that.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.